So what was happening was when we went through the book of Judges in that class, like most topics or most commentaries that are on Samson, they more times than not they were kind of coming from a negative perspective, because there's so much about Samson that it seems like that he's making choices that are come out of the flesh. He wants to marry a Gentile woman, because she looks good to him, right? Somehow he ends up walking through a vineyard, even though he has a Nazirite vow. We'll go through the details about this to kind of explain it. He has no business being in a vineyard. He ends up eating the honey out of a dead lion when he's not supposed to have anything to do with a dead body as part of his Nazirite vow. He ends up with a prostitute. He ends up with Delilah. It's just one thing after another. When something happens at a wedding feast and he gets angry, he goes and kills 30 people in order to take their clothes to say, here's the payment on the clothes that I said that I would pay for. It's just one thing after another, and it really kind of seems like the person's living out of their flesh. Yet, nevertheless, Samson finds himself in the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11. So that in itself is a paradox. Let's go ahead and get started on part 5, the study of Samson and the Messiah and the lives of the prophets and the patriarchs. I think you're going to be astonished how much Samson was actually being driven by the Lord to do these things that seemingly are wrong decisions. And you're not going to hear a lot of this because most of the time the preaching actually goes to the aspect of like, see how Samson did this and how the bad stuff happened to him, so don't do that. So those kind of life examples, they're good. Let's take a quick look at an overview of his life. Okay, before he was born, his birth was announced to his parents. It was a miraculous birth because his mother was barren. She couldn't have children. This seems to be something we've come across several times before in the past, right? Where a lady was barren and the Lord comes and tells them they're going to have children, right? He ends up marrying a Gentile. He kills a lion in the vineyard. With his bare hands, he kills the lion. The lion is in the prime of his life and just a ferocious lion, but he rips his jaw completely apart. He single-handedly starts a war with the Philistine by burning their fields with foxes. He ties a firebrand in between 2 foxes' tails, and I think he caught 300 foxes, and he sends them all off into their fields, and he burns all their fields. The Philistines get angry about that and they attack him, and then he kills another 1,000 of them with the jawbone of a donkey. The Israelites, because the Philistines are more powerful than the Israelites and they encamp against the Israelites agree to bind Samson and bring them to the Philistines. So they betray Samson into the hands of the Philistines. Later he gets with a prostitute, and the prostitute he ends up getting closed into Gaza, and he ends up picking up the gates of Gaza and traveling anywhere from 20 to 30 miles with the gates, the pillars, the whole 9 yards. Very strong feat, and carries those back up to Mount Hebron. The love of his life is Delilah, who is at the very end of the story. She betrays him. And then he's taken and he's captured by the Philistines. And once he's taken and captured by the Philistines, they persecute him, and eventually they are having a party where they put him, where he ends up, essentially he kills himself because he pushes down the 2 pillars and the house falls on him, but at the same time the Philistines are having a party on top of the house and they all end up dying too. So that's kind of the quick Cliff Notes version of all the different events. It's a lot of events. These are really short chapters, Judges chapter 13 to 16. But all of these things happen in those chapters, and it's really kind of amazing how much there is in the story. So give you a little background in the setting to this. This is like one of the darkest days of Israel. Anyhow, the cruel Philistines, God had given Israel over to them for 40 years because of Israel. It was a punishment for them not following God. And so Matthew Henry has a really interesting take on Samson. He says, in truth, Samson himself is a riddle. He's a paradox of a man who did that which was really great and good by that which was seemingly weak and evil, because he was designed not to be a pattern for us. So we don't look at Samson's life and say that's the way we're supposed to live our life, right? Okay? Who must walk by rule and not by example, but a type of him who, though he knew no sin, was made sin for us, and appeared in the likeness of sinful flesh, that he might condemn and destroy sin in the flesh. So as you can see, Matthew Henry says, look at Samson's life. It is a model of what Jesus accomplished, and that's what we're going to do today. So here we go. Starting with Judges chapter 13, we'll go verses 1 to 6. Okay? And the people of Israel did again what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. There was a certain man of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren, and you have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, or eat nothing unclean, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines. And then the woman came and told her husband. So, one of the things the angel says to the lady is, he says, this person is going to be a Nazarite from birth. That was very unusual. In fact, actually in the Bible, Samson's the only person that's a Nazarite from birth. So it's a very big distinction. A Nazarite was somebody who actually took a vow, okay? And usually it was a very short period of time, a year or two maybe, right? When you took this vow, it was something that you voluntarily made a choice about. Here, Samson didn't have a choice about it. It was his life, right? So the vow was your own decision, and there was five features that kind of define what a Nazarite vow is, and you can read about these in Numbers 6 to 21. First of all, it's voluntary. Second of all, it can be done by either a man or a woman. Thirdly, it had a specific time frame, and as I said before, a lot of times that was only a year or two. Okay, you had specific requirements or restrictions. You were to abstain from wine or fermented drink. You weren't even allowed to eat grapes, not even seeds or skins. Okay? You weren't allowed to cut your hair during the vow, and you were not allowed to go near a dead body. In fact, even if a relative died, you weren't allowed to go near the corpse. Okay? At the conclusion of the vow, a sacrifice was offered. Okay, now we'll go down to verses 19 to 24 in chapter 13. So Manoah took a young goat. Manoah is his father, okay? Manoah took a young goat with a grain offering and offered it on the rock of the Lord. And when the flame went up towards heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching. They fell on their faces on the ground. And Manoah said to his wife, We shall surely die, for we have seen God. But his wife said to him, If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted our burnt offering and our grain offering at our hands, or shown us these things, or now announced such things as these. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. So out of this, I think I came up with 12 parallels to the life of Jesus, just out of this part of the story. We're only now just beginning to get into the story of Samson, and you already have 12 parallels. First of all, the virgin birth is produced by the Spirit of God, right? The miraculous birth. Well, what's the wife's name again? Let's see here. No, they might have, and I might have taken it out. So, anyhow, his mother was barren, and she needed the miraculous Spirit of God in order to produce this baby. And so you also have the virgin birth, right? An angel appears to announce the birth. We know that is also true in the life of Mary. This is also at a time when Israel was handed over to their enemies. So in the time when Jesus was born, Israel was handed over to the Romans, right? The woman receives the news from the angel and she relays it to her husband. There's nothing in the New Testament that says that Mary actually told her husband about about the fact that the Lord came to her, but it appears that she did, right? Because if you just kind of read in between the texts, because all that she goes to, she ends up having the angel tell her about it, and the angel says, hey, you know what, Elizabeth is pregnant too. So then she decides, oh, I'm going to go check on Elizabeth. When she comes back, it's obvious that she's pregnant, right? So she probably told him how it happened. He probably didn't believe it, okay? Maybe she didn't, though. But I would think that she did, okay? So anyhow, the point here, though, is that Manoah also, he kind of believes his wife, but he's like, you know what? I want to see the man, because when this person appears to his wife, he's like, okay, but I want to see him. So they pray that he'll come back, and he comes back a second time. I kind of skipped that in the texts. Okay, so Manoah himself kind of has that where he doesn't necessarily believe either. So the angel of the Lord now appears to Manoah to confirm what his wife had been told. And we have the same thing happen with Mary and Joseph. The angel of the Lord now appears to Joseph, says don't divorce her, because he was going to put her away. But this is conceived from the Holy Spirit. So they decide to name, his wife decides to name him Samson, which means like the sun. There's an interesting verse in Malachi 4:2 that says, but for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in its wings. Notice that they're implying deliverance and salvation, and we know also that Jesus' name means salvation. So this seems to point directly to the idea of salvation and deliverance, which is what Samson was being born for, right? To deliver Israel. He is also called to begin the deliverance of Israel from their enemies, which is a type of Christ. They both grew naturally, and it's accounted that if you look at the word grow, and you look in the Hebrew of the word grow, when they talk about Samson, it holds that same meaning of growing in stature and wisdom, like it does in Luke 2:52 when it's talking about Jesus growing in stature and wisdom. So isn't that interesting? The child was consecrated from its birth. He was a Nazarite, first mention of the Bible. He's the only lifelong Nazarite who gets a commission from God. So, and that's what Jesus was, right? In a way. Well, don't confuse that he was a Nazarene with a Nazarite. Okay. It may be interesting if God chose to, have him, grow up in Nazareth because he was a Nazarite, okay? But a lot of times we get confused with that. When I say he was a Nazarite from birth, what I'm meaning is he was consecrated from birth, right? And the word, I thought I pulled that out. The word Naza, or where that's derived from, it means to be consecrated. My computer locked up on me when I was doing my notes, so I did lose a few of my edits. So anyhow, Samson's ministry begins between Mahana and Eshtaol and Zorah, which those words mean encampment, requirements, and painful sting. Encampment kind of symbolizing Jesus coming into this tabernacle of this body, requirements being the law, and painful sting being death. So it's kind of interesting. Samson's mother had faith, and God was pleased to bless her and her husband. God also blessed, Mary and Joseph in the same way. So let's go. The very next point of the very next portion of this, we talk about Samson's marriage to a Gentile bride. So we'll go to Judges chapter 14, verses 1 to 3. Okay. Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and he told his father and his mothers, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and his mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you must go and take this wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, go and get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. Okay, So off the bat, you think to yourself, like, okay, well, she's right in his eyes, so this is the lust of the eyes, right?
Right.
So, but what's interesting is let's take the positive perspectives here for a second, okay? Because as I said, you already get the negative perspectives quite often when we talk about Samson, okay? Here, Samson sees one of the daughters of the Philistines. It's not mentioned that it's forbidden for him to marry out of the Philistines according to Deuteronomy 7 verses 1 to 4, okay? And he also goes back to his father, to show reverence and respect, his father and his mother, about the marriage. Even though they're not happy about it, he still does do that. So, Samson also chooses a bride not because she's beautiful, not because she's, she has great works. You see, Christ didn't choose us because, we were beautiful and have great works. He chose us because he loved us. And we see, if you go to chapter 15, verse 2, where his father says, isn't her younger sister fairer than her? So he could have chose the one that was more beautiful about her beauty, but it wasn't about that. There was something that was happening here. And I'm kind of holding back what was happening for the conclusion of this little section. So bear with me. And in doing so, Samson, like Christ, they said, isn't there somebody to choose from among our own people, from the daughters of Israel, right? But Christ did the same thing in order to make the Israelites jealous. And that's what we see in the New Testament. Now, if we go a little further, you'll see right before Samson goes into the idea about taking on this Philistine wife, go down to the bottom of that bullet right here. It's chapter 13, verse 25. Before he even takes the wife, he says, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir on him in between these towns that I can't pronounce the names of. So, and then it says, but his father and his mother knew not that this was from the Lord. So, even though you get into preaching sometimes, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and, all that, right? And it's good preaching, okay? In this particular case, you have to try to figure out how do you balance that out with this verse that's stuck in there that says it was from the Lord. And that was kind of one of the challenges that we had, Mike, when we, were going through Judges together in the Bereans, I believe, So this is actually from the Lord, and it says that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. And you notice he's in small letters. So the translator in this case is applying the he to Samson. Okay? But maybe that he is actually should have been applied to God. Right? That the God, the God's Spirit drew him to do this, right? And even though Samson might have been operating out of, a lot of men have met their wife, love at first sight, right? Maybe he did see her and thought she was beautiful in his eyes, but it was the Spirit of the Lord working through that, okay? And he sought an occasion. So was it the Lord that sought the occasion, or was it Samson who sought the occasion? It's a little ambiguous, but it could have been the Lord. Or maybe it was both. Maybe it was Samson, and he was being moved by the Lord. Either way, it was the Lord that sought an occasion, or this was of the Lord, right? So we'll move over to the vineyard. Okay, so Samson, he went down with his father and his mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came towards him. It says that he went down to Timnah. Now, at the time he goes through the vineyard, he's by himself, okay? Not sure if I took something out of that or whatever, but we know he's by himself because he doesn't tell his mother and his father about this incident. So nobody knows about this incident except for Samson. So when he's in the vineyard and he's attacked by the lion, he's totally by himself, okay? So maybe he takes him down there and then he goes to the vineyard. I don't know. But then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion into pieces as one tears a young goat, but he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So as you can see, they weren't with him at the time that he did this. So this lion attacks him, and he rips the lion into pieces. there. Then Samson went down to Timnah, to the vineyards of Timnah. So this, some people see this as like kind of like a testing of his faith, like Jesus when he went into the wilderness. The fact that he was there by himself and yet he still continued to abstain from the wine of the vineyard and from the grapes of the vineyard, right? So there's that possibility. Samson, in killing the lion, does seem to be a picture of Satan attacking, or the lion attacking Samson seems to be a picture of like Satan attacking Christ, right? And in Peter 5:8, we see that Peter uses the lion as a metaphor of Satan. He says, "But your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he shall devour." And in Genesis 4:7, we see sin is crouching at the door, and its desire for you, but you must rule over it. That crouching at the door has the idea of a lion or a tiger or some type of large predator, right? And so we see Samson here, by this miraculous strength, taking the power of the lion. Where's the power of the lion at? It's in his jaws. Taking the power of the lion, completely ripping it apart. Right? And we see the metaphor of what Samson did with his physical strength with what Jesus accomplished in the spirit over Satan. So it's an amazing picture there of what Jesus accomplished. So through Jesus' victory over Satan, he destroyed Satan and defeated death. And we have the sweetness of the gospel which comes out of the carcass of this defeat, right? So the sweetness is the honey that's in the lion's carcass, right? And that's the gospel. And even John speaks about it going down sweet like honey in the book of Revelations. Samson's faith is shown as he takes the lion on by hand, not by might, not by power, nor by spirit, saith the Lord, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. And lastly, it's kind of interesting that when he does this miraculous feat, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but if I killed a lion with my bare hands, I'd probably have to tell somebody, okay? Maybe I wouldn't have to go brag everywhere, but you know, when I run pretty good, pretty far, a lot of times I'll take my iPhone and I'll post it onto Facebook. That's bragging, right? That ain't nothing compared to killing a lion. You know, I probably have to go, a selfie, here we go, with the lion, okay? Right? Post it on Facebook.
Nobody killed anybody. How do we know about it?
Exactly. Well, we find out later that some people did find out about it. So he did finally tell somebody. So anyhow, so finally they agree they're going to have a wedding, right? So he comes down and they're going to have a wedding feast. So we'll go to Judges chapters 14, 10 to 20. Okay. So his father came down to the woman, they prepared a feast, and as soon as they saw him, they brought 30 companions. As soon as they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to him, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If any of you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, I will give to you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Put your riddle that we may hear it." And he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. And on the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us the riddle, what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to be impoverished, or to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put forth a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother. Shall I tell you?" And she wept before him for 7 days that the feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. I feel sorry for Samson here, by the way, okay? I feel like I've been there. Then she told the riddle to her people. And the men of the city said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, so right before the riddle timeline was up, he said, "What is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion?" And he said, "Have you not plowed with my heifer? And if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon. And he struck down 30 men of the town, and he took the spoil and gave the garments to those who had been told the riddle. And in his hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. There's a lot here. There's so much here. I'm going to take the perspective of one of the commentaries that I'm pulling this from. But I'll tell you what, a lot of this here I see as a lot of parallels to the book of Revelation. Okay, you have the 7 days, and so you have the 7 years. You have halfway through the 7 days is when Samson is once again betrayed with this information. He gives this information, and then there's this torment about we're going to burn down your house, and so there's this, and we're going to burn you in it. So there's this tribulation period. So there's a lot of here that kind of relates to the book of Revelation. But you could also take a perspective how it relates to salvation. We're going to end up taking that perspective. But if you wanted to take and relate it to Revelation, you could draw a lot out of that too. Just letting you know. But we're not going to do that because we do have a limit eventually of time, right? Okay. So Samson, he comes to prepare a wedding feast, and we know that Christ prepares a wedding feast for us, right? Samson speaks these dark sayings, these parables. And we know that about Christ, right? He spoke dark sayings and parables. And it's talked about that he would do this in the book of Psalms. And he does this in the book of Matthew, chapter 13 to 10, where he answers them and he says, the mysteries of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. So then he actually shares those with the disciples, right? And Samson shares with his bride, right? Samson's bride tells the meaning of the riddle, and they are given the new garments, and these garments also kind of picture the idea of salvation. So as we share the gospel with people, and you guys are actually holders of hidden meanings, people read the gospels. Before I was saved, I read the gospels. I read all 4 gospels. There was so much I didn't get. I thought it was incredible, but there was so much I didn't get. I didn't get it till I became a Christian, and also until Christians shared with me. So you hold so much truth in your life. You have to share those dark sayings with people. So Samson then leaves his bride, and he goes back to his father's house until the time of the harvest. It's interesting, too, that it's the time of the wheat harvest, right? And we know from when we did our Feast of the Customs and the Jews, the wheat harvest is when Pentecost came, right? And the wheat harvest is when they received the Holy Spirit, right? And we also know from John chapter 14 that Jesus said, that I'm going to leave. I'm going to my Father's house where there's many houses, but then I will receive you back to me, right? And the whole picture in John 14 is the marriage custom of the Jews. And so it's kind of fitting right in here with what Samson's doing. He actually goes back to his father's house. He does it in a hot anger, so there's this kind of paradox once again about, right? But it ends up happening. It's the actual events that are happening are mirroring what Jesus is doing. Isn't that interesting? So Samson then starts a war single-handedly against the Philistines, right? So after some days, the time of the wheat harvest, Samson comes to visit his wife with a young goat. I will go into my wife in chamber, but the father would not allow him to go in. He said, I thought, this is the father of the Philistine woman, right? Okay, he says, I thought you utterly hated her. We got notes over there, Eddie, on the corner table, if you're staying. Okay. And he says, I thought you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to her, this time I shall not be innocent. I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. So Samson then went and he caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, and he turned them tail to tail, and he put the torch in between their tails, and he set them on fire to torches, and he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as all the olive orchards. And the Philistines said, who has done this? And he said to him, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, who has taken his wife and given her to be his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said to him, if this is what you do, I swear I will avenge. If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. And he struck them with the hip and the thigh with a great blow, and they went down and they stayed. Then he went down and he stayed in the cleft of a rock at Edom. Once again, we could see in this period of time here, if you relate this to the book of Revelations, that in the second half of that 7 years, there's going to be that terrible tribulation, right? And here we have the wife of Christ, being burnt, or not the wife of Samson, which is parallel to the wife of Christ, being burnt with fire and being tormented, right? So we also have that kind of scenario where the great tribulation happens at the same time. Israel then betrays Samson and Samson's faithfulness. So now, as I've said, a lot of times when you're getting into this sort of symbolism and pictures, you kind of have shifting periods, right? So we went to the book of Revelation, but now we're going to come back to Jesus' first ministry, his first coming, right? So here we go. So they had 3,000. I didn't put all the verses in here because I knew we wouldn't have time to do all the verses. So I'm just going to give you a summary. 3,000 men of the tribe of Judah, which is considered to be the strongest tribe and also symbolized by the lion. They approach Samson. They're gathered the Philistines are gathered in a great multitude, and they're getting ready to overcome these people in Judah. And they say, well, why have you come? And the Philistines say, we've come here we've come to bind thee, that we may take them into the hands of the Philistines. So what they basically tell the people of Judah is, we're looking for Samson. If you help us get Samson, basically is what they're saying, then you don't have to worry about us, right? So they're like, okay, good, we'll get you Samson, right? So the picture of Christ here is really clear, it's vivid, that Christ, he came to his own, but his own received him not. And that's speaking specifically of the Israelites. And he allowed himself to fall into there. He said, go ahead and bind me. He said, but when you bind me, make sure that you're not the ones that, kill me, right? And they promised that they wouldn't be the ones to kill him, right? When they do bind him and they take him to the Philistines shout against him. There's thousands of them. But the Spirit of the Lord once again comes mightily upon Samson, and that's when he takes the jawbone of an ass and he kills and he slays 1,000 men. So the picture here is that the Philistines, many times, and in most cases, they're kind of picturing the spiritual world of demons, if you would, and Satan's kingdom, so to speak. Okay, so you see that there's victory over Satan in Christ, right? Just as Samson, as every time the Spirit of the Lord comes on him, he's victorious over the Philistines, right? Let's go straight to the gates of Gaza, okay? Some people believe that the prostitute in verses 1 to 3 is the same person that's Delilah in verses 4 on. I don't think it is, because it speaks about another person, it seems like, when you go to verse 4. So it looks to me like the prostitute is a different person. So basically, Samson has 3 women in his life. He has the woman that he marries, right, from the Philistines. He has the prostitute here at the gate at Gaza, and then he has Delilah, okay? So Samson, there he sees the prostitute, and he lays with her and until night, and they lock him into the city, but you can't contain him in that city. He goes over to the gates. He lifts the gates up and the pillars, all of that, with his incredible strength. He carries it 20 to 30 miles over to Mount Hebron. This Mount Hebron is really interesting because that's the same mount that we talked about in Joshua, right? It's where they had begun to defeat the enemies of God, but they didn't finish the work. And the Philistines came back and now had control of that. So Samson, understanding the history behind this, appears to take these gates, these strongholds, and carry them up there to symbolize the idea that that the victory is complete, and the gates of hell cannot contain Jesus Christ. He's the door and he's the life. What he did was a mighty work of God, picking that up and conquering hell and death and Hades for us. And there's so much in the whole gates of that, but we'll have to just leave a quick overview for it due to time. So, Samson's betrayal by Delilah, the love of his life. Delilah appears to be the love of his life, right? And the lords of the Philistines came up to her, and he said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by that what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him and humble him, and we will give to you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, we'll each give to you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your strength lies and how we might bound you, and so that one could subdue you. Well, Samson tells her a couple of times. He just kind of plays with her and tells her a couple of lies, and she tests some, and the Philistines come in and they die, and he's not able to be bound, and eventually she finally comes back and she says she's really upset with him, right? And he knows exactly what's going on here. I mean, he's not that dumb, you guys, right? He knows what's going on, right? So when Delilah saw that he had not told her what was in his heart, she sent and she called the Lord's, when Delilah saw that he had told what was all in his heart. So on the third time, finally she talks him into telling him, right? And he knows exactly what this means. This means she's going to betray him. He knows it, okay? So this time she believes that he really told her the truth, right? So she calls the lords of the Philistines. She says, come up again. He has told me all that is in his heart. The lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands, and she made him sleep on her knees. And then she called a man to shave off the 7 locks of head. And she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep, and he said, I will go out as other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze chains. We see Delilah, the love of Samson's life. She depicts Israel and Jesus' great love for his people. She participates, but she doesn't actually perform the persecution, right? And we say the same thing with Israel, right? Samson's humiliated. He has his eyes gorged out. He has his hair cut. Without being able to see, he's mocked. They blindfold, and we had the same thing happen with Christ, right? Where he was blindfolded, and they were saying, hey, who struck you? So there's the same kind of tormenting and kind of playing games, cat and mouse kind of games with Samson, right? She betrays him for pieces of silver. We know that Judas betrayed Jesus for pieces of silver. Samson knew he was going to be betrayed, yet he still loved Delilah, and he allowed it to happen. Now, what a picture of Judas that is. As he told Judas, go out and do it quickly. And Judas betrayed him with a kiss. She had another man do the cutting of the hair, which took away the strength. Once again, she did not participate. She didn't actually do the hands-on participation. She only participated kind of like coordinating it, right? And the Spirit of the Lord departed from Samson. And we know that the Spirit of the Lord also departed from Jesus when he said, Eli, 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 lama sabachthani, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? Well, why did he forsake Jesus? Because he put all that sin on him at that time. And this was the one time in the whole story of the book of Samson, or the story of Samson, where the Spirit of the Lord wasn't with him, it departed from him. And we see that exact scenario with Jesus. It's amazing. Well, Judges 16 to 28, we see Samson's victory and his death. So Samson called on the Lord. He said, oh God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, oh God, that I may be avenged on the Philistine for my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, and his right hand in one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all of his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon the people that were in it. So all the dead whom he killed at his death were more than whom he had killed in his life. It's obvious. We see Samson, he has his outstretched arms, and he ends up killing the Philistines, just like Jesus did on the cross, overcoming the spiritual world for us and giving us salvation. And he did this, he knew what he was doing. He knew he was committing himself to death in order to have this victory over the Philistines. And Jesus likewise knew the exact same thing, that he was dying in order to win this victory over the Philistines. What's interesting, though, is that there appears to be some allusion in the New Testament that all these evil spirits were thinking, hey, this is great, man, we're having a party, we're winning this war, and yet they ended up losing it, in that time with the cross. And just like the Philistines being on top of what had happened was, when they put him down there to make sport of him, Samson himself asked to be put in between those two pillars, knowing that this was what he was going to do, and asked to do. By faith, he knew God would grant it to him, right? So he asked to be put there in between those two pillars. And meanwhile, the Philistines, the 3,000 of them, are on top of this roof, this flat roof, and they're just having a grand time, because they now have this person who's caused them so much problems, Samson, and they're having a great time partying. So the pillars, many people point to the pillars as being the high priest and legalism, and that Jesus became both, pushed over the old and became our new high priest, and the new law of the Spirit. Samson demolished the temple of the 3,000 Philistines, and he also demolished his own temple, and in that he destroyed them, just as Jesus did in his tabernacle. Samson's brothers and his family's ministries, they took him to the place of these are what these words mean, by the way, and I have a parallels. There's a lot of meaning in the names of this story, and I have all of that at the end of this. Okay, painful sting meaning the death, and requirements meaning the law. Into the tomb of Manoah, and a place of rest in his father. So Jesus returns to his father, just like Samson returned to the place of rest of his father. The body was taken up by brave Israelites, just as Joseph and Nicodemus took up the body. The Philistines didn't kill Samson immediately, but they wanted to prolong his agony and his death, and we see that with the Romans, right? They made sport of him, and we see that with the Romans. And then through his death, he destroyed the power of death, was what Jesus accomplished according to Hebrews chapters 2, verses 14 to 15. So, Samson is in as I said, the Hebrews Faith Hall of Fame. We go to verse 11, 32 to 36. We see Samson's name is there. He says, for a time would fail me to talk about Gideon, Barak, and Samson, and he mentions others. And then you see all of these things that these people accomplished, and many of them, he was attributing them to the group as a whole, but you can see many of these things were also very true in those 3 short chapters in Judges about Samson's life, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, stopped the mouths of lions, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign enemies to flight, although they were tortured and refusing to accept release, right? That they might rise again to a better life, and they suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. So the next time you hear a sermon about the person of Samson, and we're focusing on all those ideas of sins of the flesh and lust of the flesh and lust of the eyes and all those kinds of things, remember how Samson also models Christ in his life. There's all these names. I'm not going to go over them, but if you read those through, and as you read through the chapter, and it's interesting how all those things fit into our relationship with Jesus, and that pretty much covers everything.